I should have known better than to leave for a business trip without checking in first. It was supposed to be just a week, 7 days. One suitcase, one conference, and one set of in-laws begging for some bonding time with my 14-year-old son, Sam. How bad could it be? That's what I told myself as I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening. I hadn't expected anything to change, but everything did. The porch light flickered on as I approached, and the door stood wide open. At first glance, everything seemed normal. You know that moment when you step into a room and everything appears fine, but then you realize you're the only one who didn't get the memo? That was the feeling that hit me. My mom greeted me with that practiced smile, the one that said, "Everything's fine, nothing's wrong, and if there is, it's definitely not my fault." "Hey, Sarah," she sang, her voice as sweet as honey, almost too sweet. My dad appeared behind her, wearing that half smile of his, the one that made him look like he hadn't seen a real problem in decades and wasn't about to start now. And then Sam appeared. But something was off. Normally, Sam would run to me the second he saw me, maybe even launch into his hour-long recap of everything he did during my trip. Instead, he stood there, eyes down, holding his backpack with a strange intensity, as though it was the only thing anchoring him to the ground. "Hey, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Missed you." He gave me a quick hug, but it was stiff, like hugging a distant acquaintance, not my son. "Everything good, Sam?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But his response was flat, the kind of flat that makes your stomach twist. "Yeah." There was no excitement in his tone, no warmth. His hands were wrapped tight around his bag straps like he was holding on to something I couldn't see but could feel. "Thanks for watching him," I said to my parents. I wasn't sure what they had actually watched, but it was the polite thing to say. My mom responded with her usual cheer. "Oh, of course. Family takes care of family." My dad nodded, barely looking up. "Drive safe." As I led Sam to the car, I tried to shake off the gnawing feeling. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe it was nothing. But then as I started the car, I saw it again, his hollow gaze staring out the window like he was miles away, lost in a world I wasn't a part of. "So, how was it?" I asked, glancing over at him. "Fine," he muttered, still staring out the window. I tried again, feeling that knot tightening in my chest. "Did you have fun with Grandma and Grandpa?" "Yeah." The word fell from his lips like a stone sinking into water. I kept pushing, my voice lighter than I felt. "You've got your soccer match this weekend, right?" He nodded, but his jaw was tight, his grip on the seat almost white-knuckled. I could feel it, the distance growing between us like an invisible wall had gone up during the past week. Then, as if everything in my chest dropped at once, he spoke the words that stopped my heart. "I'm not on the team anymore." "What do you mean, you're not on the team?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. "They kicked me out." His tone was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it felt like a slap across my face. "Why?" I asked, but I already knew. I could feel it, the first crack in something that had always been so solid. "I don't know. They just said I wasn't part of the team anymore." "Who said that?" "The coach," he whispered, barely making eye contact. And that was it. I could feel my world tilting. My son, the one who had lived and breathed soccer, had just been thrown out without explanation, without a reason, and I couldn't even understand why. I tried again, voice trembling now. "What happened, Sam? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," he whispered, voice small, fragile, and then I understood. Whatever happened, whatever had gone wrong, it was bigger than this conversation. Sam wasn't just hurt. He was being broken down, and I had no idea how it happened. The silence in the car felt suffocating. I could feel the weight of everything hanging between us, thick and heavy like fog. Sam hadn't spoken since I asked him about soccer, and I didn't know what to say next. The road stretched ahead of us, just another ordinary drive home, but the inside of the car was anything but ordinary. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to piece together the fragments of what I just heard. Sam, my son, had been kicked off the team for reasons I couldn't understand, and now this. I tried to keep my voice steady as I glanced at him, hoping he'd open up. "You sure you're okay?" I asked quietly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. He didn't answer at first. He just stared out the window, eyes blank, like he wasn't even here with me. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. It's fine, Mom. But it wasn't fine. It was anything but fine. We pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of home doing nothing to ease the tension in my chest. I tried to act like everything was normal, like nothing had changed, but I couldn't ignore the fact that something was horribly wrong. We went inside, and I made dinner because that's what mothers do, right? We cook even when the world feels like it's falling apart. Sam sat at the table, picking at his food like it didn't matter, like nothing mattered. "Sam," I said, my voice breaking through the quiet, "I need you to tell me what happened." The words felt harder to say than I expected, but I had to know. I had to understand. He looked at me, his eyes tired, but there was something else there too, a kind of fear. Then it came. "Grandma said I stole something." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What? What do you mean?" My voice felt thick, like I couldn't get the words out fast enough. "She told everyone I stole it," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't, I swear." "Stole what?" I asked, barely able to whisper the words. "My soccer shoes," Sam muttered, his eyes downcast, his face pale. "I didn't take them, but she said I did. She told people at school, the coach, everyone. They all think I did it." I felt the ground beneath me give way. My son, my beautiful, hardworking, honest son, being accused of something he didn't do. Something he never would do. The world around me spun for a moment as I tried to process the weight of his words. "Why would she say that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. In this family, my parents always had a way of turning things upside down. They had a way of making sure everyone knew who was in control, and Sam had become the target this time. "I don't know," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't take them. I swear, I didn't touch them." He looked at me then, and I saw the hurt in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't do it." I believed him. Without question, my son had always been honest. He wasn't perfect, but he was good, and I knew in my bones that he wasn't capable of stealing. My parents, however, were a different story. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about soccer shoes. This wasn't even about what Sam did or didn't do. It was about control. It was about the way my parents had always handled things, sweeping problems under the rug, making sure everyone stayed in line, and always pretending to be the authority. I took a deep breath, trying to hold it together for Sam's sake. He needed me to be strong. "What happened after she told people, Sam? What did she say?" He swallowed hard before answering. "She said I did it on purpose. She said I stole Belle's shoes because I wanted to outshine her. And then they came into my room and told me I was grounded. I didn't even get to explain." Grounded. For something he didn't do. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but I couldn't show it. Not yet. "Did they ever find the shoes?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah, they said they found them later. They were just sitting in the hallway at their house. But I didn't put them there. I didn't even touch them." His voice shook as he said it, but he was telling the truth. My stomach twisted. I knew my parents. I knew how they could twist things to make it look like their version of the story was the truth. I swallowed, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Did they ever ask you what happened? Did they ever listen to you?" Sam's eyes filled with tears. "No, Mom. They didn't even listen to me." I felt my heart break for him. My parents had turned this situation into something ugly, something that could ruin my son's reputation. And for what? To teach him respect? To make sure he didn't outshine their favorite? I looked at Sam, his hands shaking as he pushed the food around on his plate. This wasn't just about soccer. It wasn't even about stolen shoes. This was about something deeper, something I hadn't seen before. And now I had to fix it. I couldn't let my parents do this to him. Not anymore. The next few days felt like a blur. I tried to hold it together for Sam's sake, but the weight of what was happening crushed me. Every time I looked at him, my heart broke a little more. My son, the kid who used to laugh and run around with joy, now sat in silence, his eyes lost in some distant place. It was like he had already given up, not because he wanted to, but because he had been forced to. Forced into this corner by people who were supposed to love him. I made calls, one after another, first to the school, then to the coach, then to some of Sam's friends. But nothing was changing. Everyone believed my parents. Everyone accepted the story they had painted without question. "Sam's a thief," they said, as if those words had any weight without proof, without a shred of evidence. But that's how it worked, right? In small towns, when someone speaks with enough authority, everyone listens. And that's exactly what my parents had done. They had used their reputation, their influence, to smear my son's name. They didn't care that they were ruining him. They didn't care that this would follow him for the rest of his life. I couldn't stay passive anymore. I had to do something. I remembered the lawyer my grandfather had trusted for years, Lori. A woman with a reputation for standing up to the powerful, the ones who thought they could push people around and get away with it. I wasn't about to let my parents walk all over us, no matter how many times they said, "It's for his own good." No, this wasn't about respect. This was about control. And I was done letting them control my son's life. I picked up the phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed her number. When Lori answered, her voice was calm, reassuring. It was exactly what I needed. I explained everything. Sam's suspension from the team, the accusations, how my parents had spread their story without even considering Sam's side. She listened, without interrupting, taking it all in. When I finished, she didn't hesitate. "We can do something about this," she said firmly. "This is defamation, Sarah, and I'm not going to let them get away with it." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't as hopeless as I had thought. Maybe I didn't have to just watch my son suffer in silence. Maybe I could make them stop. We didn't waste time. Lori sent a demand letter to my parents, demanding that they provide evidence for their accusations and cease spreading false claims. I knew my parents well enough to know they'd ignore it, but I also knew it was a necessary first step. It would put them on notice. And if they didn't respond, if they didn't stop, I'd be ready to take it further. Sam, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into himself. Every day, I saw the light in his eyes dim a little more. I tried to reassure him, tried to tell him everything would be okay, but how could I promise that when I didn't even know how to fix it? Then came the breakthrough. Lori's investigation into my parents' handling of my grandfather's trust uncovered something unexpected. My parents had been withdrawing money from the trust under the guise of advances that were never repaid. Money that should have gone to Sam was being used for their own benefit. I couldn't believe it. Not just the accusation against Sam, but this too. They had been lying to me about something that was supposed to protect my son's future. When I learned the truth, I knew it was time to act. The game had changed. It wasn't just about my son's reputation anymore. It was about the years of deceit, the manipulation, the way they had taken what wasn't theirs to take, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I made the call to my parents. My voice was steady, but underneath, there was a fire that hadn't been there before. I wasn't going to back down. They had crossed a line. They didn't know it yet, but they would soon enough. And I would make sure they paid for every lie they'd told. The stakes had been raised. The damage they had caused wasn't going to be swept under the rug. This time, I was the one in control. The phone call to my parents went exactly as I expected. My mom answered with that falsely sweet voice, the one she reserved for moments when she knew she was in the wrong but wasn't ready to admit it. "Hello, Sarah? I'm glad you called." "What's going on?" she said, trying to sound innocent, like this was some casual conversation. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What did you do to my son?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with a quiet fury that I could no longer hide. She scoffed, as if the question was absurd. "What are you talking about? You know your son was acting up. He's the one who stole Belle's shoes. We're just trying to teach him some respect." That was it, wasn't it? The underlying issue wasn't the shoes or the team. It was always about control. The respect they wanted my son to learn wasn't about discipline. It was about making sure he knew his place, below them, beneath their expectations. "Do you have any proof, Mom?" I asked, a thread of disbelief in my voice. "Did you even ask him what happened before you started spreading lies to the school, to his friends, to everyone?" There was a pause. I could feel her trying to come up with a response that would still make her seem righteous, like she had somehow done the right thing. "Sarah, this isn't a courtroom," she said finally, her voice dripping with condescension. "We just needed to make sure your son understood that actions have consequences." "Consequences?" I repeated, incredulous. "Do you understand what you've done to him? You've destroyed his reputation. You've torn apart his life without even listening to him, without even knowing the truth. My voice was rising now, no longer trying to contain the anger that had been building up for days. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. But she wasn't done. Even if he didn't take the shoes, he still needs to learn respect. And sometimes, you need to be tough on your kids to make them understand. I could hear the smugness in her tone, the certainty that she was right, that her way was the only way. The woman who had spent years underestimating me, who thought she could control every situation, every person, was now trying to justify what she'd done to my son. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. You don't get to ruin his life to teach him respect, I said, my voice barely a whisper now. You didn't even try to understand what happened. You didn't even ask him. You just assumed. And because you assumed, you destroyed him. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't respond. I thought maybe she was going to apologize or at least acknowledge the harm she'd caused. But of course, that didn't happen. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and detached. Sarah, you've made your point, but if you're going to bring lawyers into this, you're not just making things hard for us, you're making things hard for you too. You're making things hard for Sam. I didn't let her words sink in. I didn't need to be guilted into backing down. This wasn't about what was easy for me or for Sam. This was about making sure that they understood the weight of their actions. No, Mom, you made things hard for him, I said. You took away his voice, his reputation, and his future. I'm done letting you do that. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, the control. I'm not going to let you get away with this, I added, voice firm now. And neither will Sam. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't going to let them get away with destroying my son. I wasn't going to let them use their power to control us anymore. I had made the call, and it was the first step in taking back our lives. Sam was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked back in, and his eyes flicked to me, uncertain, as if he was waiting for my reaction. I walked over to him, crouching down so I was at eye level. We're going to make them answer for what they did, Sam. I promise. No one is going to hurt you again, not like this. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine for the truth in my words. Finally, he nodded, and for the first time in days, I saw a tiny spark of relief in his eyes. We weren't alone in this, not anymore, and now we had a plan. The days that followed felt like a series of calculated moves, one after the other, each step taking us closer to some kind of resolution. The demand letters Lori had sent out to my parents hadn't gone unanswered, but the response was exactly what I expected. They pretended they were too busy to deal with it. They ignored the evidence, dismissed the accusations, and continued to act like they were the ones in control. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. I wasn't going to let them win again. I took a deep breath before making the next phone call. This time, it wasn't to my parents. It was to the school, to the coach, to anyone who had been affected by my parents' lies. I couldn't let the damage they had caused to Sam's reputation slide. Not without a fight. I kept my voice calm, steady, and firm, even though every word felt like it weighed a ton. Your actions have consequences, I told the coach when I finally reached him. You kicked my son off the team without any proof, based on nothing more than gossip. This is a violation of trust, and we need to fix it. The coach was quiet on the other end of the line, probably caught off guard by my directness. I wasn't giving them the option to hide behind their excuses anymore. Not for Sam. I'll look into it, he said after a long pause, his tone softer than it had been when I'd first spoken to him. That was all I needed. I knew that the truth was on our side, and it was only a matter of time before the pieces fell into place. But I also knew that in this town, the truth didn't always win immediately. Sometimes you had to drag it out, piece by painful piece. By the end of the week, Lori called me with some unexpected news. I've got the trust documents, she said, her voice low but filled with the kind of satisfaction that comes with a victory. And I found something that I think you'll want to see. I felt a cold chill run through me. My heart started racing as she explained that my parents, as trustees of my grandfather's estate, had been mismanaging the trust funds. They had been taking advances without repayment, all the while telling me everything was fine. But the truth was far from fine. They had taken thousands of dollars, money that should have been going to Sam, and used it for themselves. I didn't have to think twice. The decision was made. I wasn't just going to stand by and let them get away with this, with their lies, their manipulation. Not this time. I was going to make them answer for everything. I called my parents again, my fingers trembling as I dialed their number. My mother answered on the first ring, and I could already hear the tension in her voice. She knew something was coming. "Sarah," she said, her tone clipped. "What now?" I didn't waste time. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the trust, about the money you've been taking without repaying it." There was silence on the other end, a long pause that felt like it stretched forever. I could feel her trying to come up with an excuse, a way to explain it away. "You're going to have to pay it all back," I said, my voice firm. "And you're going to have to face the consequences for what you've done." I heard her take a sharp breath, then a forced sigh. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," she snapped. "It was never meant to be like this. We were just trying to help. You have to understand." I cut her off. "No, Mom, you don't get to play the victim. You've hurt my son. You've damaged his life, and now you're going to fix it. You're going to answer for everything you've done." There was no more denying, no more evading. The truth had caught up with them, and there was nothing they could do to escape it. By the end of the day, the school had reinstated Sam on the soccer team, albeit with an apology that felt more like a formality than genuine remorse. But I didn't care. The damage had already been done. What mattered was that my son was back where he belonged, and that people were starting to listen. Sam didn't say much when I told him about the changes. He just nodded, the weight lifting off his shoulders, just a little. But there was still something in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't fully healed. I knew it would take time. It would take time for the whispers to stop, for the pain to fade. But we would get through this. We always did. And this time I was ready to make sure that we would come out stronger on the other side. As for my parents, I went no contact with them. No announcements, no big confrontations, just silence, the kind that comes when you've had enough. And I was done. Done with their control, done with their lies, done with the damage they'd caused. The truth had finally won. It's funny how silence can be both a comfort and a reminder of what's been lost. The days after I cut contact with my parents were some of the quietest I've ever experienced. No phone calls, no forced family gatherings, no more of my mother's passive-aggressive comments or my father's disinterested nods. It was just me and Sam, trying to rebuild what had been broken. And as much as the silence made me feel like I was walking through a fog, it also gave me room to breathe, room to think. Sam didn't talk much about what had happened in the weeks following my parents' betrayal. He was quiet, yes, but there was something different about him. He wasn't lost in his head the way he had been, and every once in a while I caught him smiling, small smiles, but real. I could see the spark coming back to his eyes, and that was enough. I tried to take it one day at a time. The first few weeks after everything unfolded, I was more focused on Sam than anything else. I made sure he was eating right, getting enough sleep, and even tried to coax him back into his usual routine. I'd ask about his homework, his friends, his soccer practice, but some days he still didn't want to talk. Some days, he still seemed like he was carrying a weight that wasn't his to bear. There were times when I'd catch him staring out the window, his hands fidgeting, lost in thought. And when I asked him if he was okay, he'd say, "I'm fine," but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. That was when I knew the scars were still there, buried just under the surface. Not just the ones from what had happened with my parents, but from all the years of watching me shrink myself to fit into their world. But we were slowly getting better. I made sure we kept to a new normal, one that didn't involve my parents or their expectations. We spent weekends doing simple things, going for walks, watching movies together, baking cookies. I let him decide what he wanted to do, no pressure. Slowly, I saw him returning to the person he was before all this, more confident, more himself. One Saturday, about a month after everything started, Sam asked if we could visit his old soccer team. He hadn't been back since the coach reinstated him, and I had to admit I was nervous. The damage that had been done wasn't something that could be undone overnight. But I agreed, not wanting to hold him back. When we walked into the soccer field, I could feel the tension rise in my chest. The parents, the kids, all of them had heard the rumors, and I knew they all still remembered what had happened. But Sam didn't flinch. He walked onto the field with his head held high, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was just another kid, ready to play. And when his friends saw him, something shifted. One by one, they came up to him, offering hesitant handshakes, some awkwardly patting him on the back. But in their eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected, genuine recognition. They didn't know all the details of what had happened, but they knew Sam, and they were willing to forgive. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't like everything was back to how it was before the accusations, but it was progress, real progress. After practice, Sam turned to me, his face bright. "I'm glad I came back," he said, his voice a little more confident than I had heard in weeks. "It's not the same, but it feels right." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm glad, too." And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving forward, that the past was no longer holding us hostage. My parents might have tried to destroy us, but they couldn't. They couldn't take away Sam's future. They couldn't take away his ability to stand tall, to find his way again. As we drove home that evening, Sam smiled in the rearview mirror, a real smile, the kind that said he was starting to heal. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders too. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. It's strange how the hardest part of moving on isn't always the actual confrontation. It's the quiet aftermath. The pieces of the puzzle don't fit back together immediately. I thought once we'd gotten through the worst of it, things would return to normal, but I quickly learned that normal was a distant memory. It wasn't about the school or the soccer team anymore. It was about me and Sam finding our place in a world that had suddenly become uncertain, fractured. As the weeks went by, I noticed something different in Sam. He didn't talk much, but I could tell he was thinking. The silence between us was comfortable now, no longer filled with the tension and fear of the past. But there was a sadness in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. I wanted to ask him if he was okay, but I knew from experience that sometimes you had to let them come to you. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch, staring out into the backyard like he was looking for something. An answer, maybe. I stood in the doorway for a while, watching him, wondering how much of what had happened he'd internalized. After everything he'd been through, I didn't know what he needed from me anymore. Finally, I walked out, my feet dragging just a little on the gravel. I didn't say anything at first. Sometimes, silence says more than words. I sat next to him, the cool evening air brushing my face, and I just let him be. After a while, he spoke. "I don't know what I did wrong, Mom." I blinked, the words taking me by surprise. Sam had always been the kind of kid who tried to make sense of everything, who needed to know the why of things, the reason behind them. But this was something no child should ever have to explain, much less carry. "You didn't do anything wrong, Sam," I said softly, my voice tight. I had to stop myself from crying. "You didn't deserve any of that." "I know, but..." His voice faltered, and he squeezed his hands into fists. "They made me feel like I did, like I was bad." I swallowed hard. "They tried to make you feel that way, but it's not true. You know that, right? You're not bad. You're good, Sam. You always have been." His eyes were wet when he looked up at me, and I could see the tears threatening to fall. But he held them back, just like he always did. "It doesn't make sense, Mom. Grandma and Grandpa, should have believed me. They're supposed to love me. But they didn't. They never did." I felt my chest tighten as the words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the accusations that had hurt Sam. It was the realization that the people who were supposed to love and protect him, who were supposed to be his family, had chosen to believe a lie over the truth. "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I know, Sam, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that they did this to you." He turned to me, his face open now, vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in weeks. "Mom, I feel like everything's broken, like I can't fix it, like no one will ever believe me." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Words that would heal, words that would make him understand that his truth was enough. "Sam," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "the truth is never easy, but it's always enough. It might take time for people to see it, for them to understand. But it's always enough, and I'm proud of you for holding on to it." He looked at me, the flicker of a smile breaking through the sadness. "You really think so?" "I know so," I replied, pulling him into a hug. In that moment, I realized that Sam was stronger than I had ever given him credit for. He'd been through so much, but he was still here, still fighting. And maybe that was the biggest lesson I needed to learn. I'd been so focused on fixing everything that I had forgotten to let him find his own way, to let him heal in his own time. We sat there for a long time, the stars coming out one by one above us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were going to be okay. It wasn't going to be easy. There were days ahead that would still be hard. But we had each other, and that was all that mattered. We were going to make it through this, together. Time passed slowly, but the heaviness that had once clung to me began to lift, piece by piece. It wasn't an overnight change, and it wasn't a dramatic Hollywood-style moment. It was something quieter, something subtler, an acceptance that this chapter, as painful as it had been, was finally coming to an end. For the first time in months, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, and when I looked at Sam, I saw the smallest spark of hope in his eyes. He wasn't the same kid who had been accused, who had been labeled a thief. No, this Sam, this version of him, was stronger. We had our moments, the days when the world seemed to fall apart again, when old wounds reopened, or when whispers from the past would surface. There were still people who questioned Sam's character behind closed doors, who were too quick to believe what they heard. But Sam didn't seem to mind as much anymore. He had learned to ignore them, to focus on what mattered. The people who believed in him, the people who had stood by his side. One afternoon, about 2 months after everything had settled, I received an unexpected letter. It was from my parents, or more accurately, from their lawyer. The letter was short, almost terse, and it was clear they were trying to avoid any further confrontation. They had settled the trust issue, paid back the money they owed, and made it clear that they wanted to move on. The letter didn't apologize. There were no admissions of guilt, no acknowledgement of the damage they'd done. It was simply a statement of closure, a way for them to pretend like everything was fine. I stared at the letter for a long time, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper. I had expected something like this. My parents never had the courage to face the truth directly. They'd never owned up to the harm they'd caused. They just wanted to sweep it under the rug, act like it had never happened. I could have responded. I could have called them out, demanded an apology, forced them to recognize the pain they had caused. But I didn't. Instead, I set the letter down, folded it carefully, and tucked it away in a drawer. I had long since stopped looking for closure from them. They weren't the people I needed them to be, and that was something I had come to accept. What mattered now was Sam. We were sitting on the porch one evening when I told him about the letter. He didn't ask for details, but he listened, and when I finished, he gave me a soft, knowing smile. "I think we're better off without them, Mom," he said quietly. His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had been so focused on trying to fix things, on trying to make my parents understand. But Sam was right. We didn't need them. We had each other, and that was enough. As we sat there in the fading light of the evening, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The world wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But we had found our way, slowly in our own time. And that was more than I could have hoped for. Sam had started to reconnect with some of his old friends, and the coach had even asked him to play in a local match. It wasn't the same as before, but it didn't need to be. He was healing, and I was finally starting to feel like I was too. We didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The truth was on our side, and we knew it. And that, I realized, was all that mattered. I looked at Sam, my heart full, and he caught my eye. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly, his voice steady, the weight of everything that had happened lingering only in the corners of his smile. And in that moment, I knew we were okay. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. We were going to be fine. Life can be a bit like a messy family dinner, full of drama, misunderstandings, and the occasional misplaced accusation. But no matter how tangled the situation gets, always remember, your truth is enough, and you have the power to rewrite your own story. Don't let anyone dictate your worth. And hey, if you're feeling inspired by a good comeback story, like this one, subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel. We promise it's a place for strong coffee, stronger opinions, and the kind of laughs that help you forget the chaos. Leave a comment and let us know, what's your next move?